Hello, and thank you for joining us today for The Issues. I'm your host, Vern Fuller. We all know that violence has been a plague in our city, and so much of it seems to be inherently senseless, making sorrow practically a part of our daily lives when we empathize with the families and victims. There have been many protests and demonstrations in St. Louis which catapulted us into the global press since the death of Mike Brown, but the violence continues, particularly within the African American community. By no means am I saying that it's not occurring within predominantly white St. Louis communities, but there seems to be a huge disparity. On today's show, we focus on how this hot topic of the violence here in the city of St. Louis is changing the face of our city. We're going to expose this problem and bring solutions to this matter. The issue starts right now. We want your input as well. Please give us your questions on our STL TV Facebook page at The Issues. We'll read a few of them live later on in the show. Joining me today is Chief Sam Dotson of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. Chief, welcome to The Issues.
Good, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
You have a tough job.
We have a tough job as a city. We really do. And the police department plays a huge role in it, but it's not the only role. And I think you said it very well in the opening remarks. We see this on a daily basis, the pain, the sorrow. It happens far too frequently.
Let's start out with your outreach program that has it's an initiative that just created. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that as I travel around and go to neighborhood meetings and meet with people is they support their police department. They support the positive things that are happening in the city. So I wanted to work on bringing that to more neighborhoods, to spreading it out. So we formed a community engagement and organizational development unit. And really, it's got two focuses. The first is to look around the region, look around the country, and find the best practices. How can the police department partner with our neighborhoods in a way that helps to reduce violence, that helps increase people's confidence in law enforcement? Because, as you said in the beginning, too, there have been protests, and people have questions about law enforcement. I'm very proud of the Metropolitan Police Department. I think in the region we're the leader in progressive law enforcement. But I want the community to feel more comfortable. So that's one of the focus. Find best practices, find things that are happening around the country, bring them to St. Louis, let's make them part of our everyday job. And this unit's job isn't to go out and do it just themselves. It's to train the entire department every day. When we talk about community policing, it's not just a phrase. It's the way that we have to do our job if we're going to reduce crime, reduce the violence. The second piece, the organizational development, to go out and find best practices around implicit bias training. We all grow up and just from our families, from our neighborhoods, a variety of things have bias that are pre-programmed, and subconsciously we don't even realize that they're there. To help expose those and help to broaden officers' perspectives, work on de-escalation. So when we do encounter violent individuals, hey, I always want our police officers, and I think you do too, I always want our police officers at the end of the day to go home. Their safety is paramount with me. But I also want to make sure that we have best practices around de-escalating situations where violence, whether it's with a gun, a knife, physical confrontations. So bringing implicit bias training, bringing de-escalation training, bringing those things, and making sure that the department, every officer in the department has the right skill set to go out and do their job. And then we were talking about it a little bit before the show started, mental health issues. With the cutbacks that we've seen at the federal and the state level, a lot of times police officers, when they get called to a situation, are dealing with individuals that have mental health issues, mental health challenges. And they may not know that. How to identify mental health issues and how to get those people to the services that they need. Because some people need to be arrested, deserve to be arrested, there is no choice.
Sure.
But a lot of times we have to make sure we get to mental health programs, we get to jobs programs, substance abuse, a variety of things. Police officers aren't social workers, but because of a lot of cutbacks, we've become social workers.
Well, Chief, let's go right to the violence matter, particularly as it is portrayed. And tell me if the statistical data backs this up. Is it higher in the African American community versus other ethnic populations?
What we see is violence in the African American community, African American on African American, is higher than any other group in the city. And it's typically African American male and African American male. Just to give you a number, last year there were 159 murders in the city of St. Louis. Far too many murders, more than we've seen in the last couple of years. Over 90% of those African American on African American.
Can we look to the St. Louis Police Department to fix this problem, or is it bigger than the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department?
I think everybody has a role, and we have our role, and I kind of touched on it. But we cannot solve it by ourselves. I've always said, and I say frequently, economics is the way to change behaviors. We have to have jobs. We have to have wages that support those jobs. We have to have a variety of things. But the police department is only one facet. The rest of city government, state government, the federal government has to step up. We've talked about, President Obama's program, My Brother's Keeper. Good start, got to be more widespread. And I think later on you're going to talk to James Clark from Better Family Life. Good start. James is trying to bring his programs to scale. Good start.
Let's just go there for a second. A lot of protests, a lot of signs, a lot of T-shirts. Are we reaching the right demographic? And if you would, tell us what is the demographic that is imposing most of the violence?
No, and I absolutely support everybody's First Amendment right to go out and have their voice heard, to talk about any issue they want, whether it's Michael Brown, police behaviors, adopt a pet. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. I support, and it's my job and every police officer's job to make sure you have an opportunity to have your voice heard. But what we're seeing is that message is somehow getting twisted, and it's not being portrayed in the same way to younger individuals. So let's say that 15 to 24, 25-year group. They're the ones that are out perpetuating the violence. And a lot of times we've said black-on-black crime.
15 to 24.
It is. It's not uncommon for us to find a group of teenagers that aren't even old enough to drive riding around in a stolen car. It happens, and it happens far too frequently. So those are the groups that we have to get into. We have to get into those groups and offer them educational opportunities, families. We talked about the breakdown of nuclear families. The family unit is probably the most important thing in reducing crime. When you and I were growing up, if you or I did something wrong, the neighbors probably grabbed us by our ear and drug us back to our mothers or fathers and said, look what little Sammy's doing. We don't see that anymore. We don't see that the parents are taking an active role. I'll give you an example. Recently, we've seen these large groups of teenagers that come together in the Del Mar Loop, the Forest Park area, Washington Avenue. We had a 15-year-old that had a gun and started shooting the gun into the crowd. That 15-year-old is in a group with 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Who do you think the influences are? They're not with their parents. Parents have to step up. How does a 15-year-old have access to a gun and then think it's okay to be in a crowd of people and start to shoot the gun? Where are the parents in that?
Well, that's another issue. We almost have to go with the babies having babies conversation to kind of get that. But here's a question I have for you. Where are the guns coming from? How are 15-year-olds getting their hands on semi-automatic weapons? So
here's the challenge. Missouri has some of the most liberal gun laws in the country. We have seen a 70% increase in stolen guns in the first quarter in the city of St. Louis. The vast majority of those are stolen out of cars. So individuals that, and I get the Second Amendment, I understand that. I'm not talking about the Second Amendment, but people that have conceal and carry permits, have their guns, don't secure them in their cars. Guess what? Criminals know that you can't carry your gun into some business, or you can't carry your gun into some sporting events. So they know if they break into enough cars around that venue, they're going to find guns. And so we are seeing an increase in crime.
Sure.
People breaking into cars, looking for firearms. 70% increase. Those guns immediately go into the hands of criminals or 15-year-olds who don't have an understanding, aren't mature enough to deal with their emotions, to deal with conflicts, and resort to that level of violence because they've been desensitized by video games, by movies, by a variety of things. And I have countless stories about kids who don't understand the consequences or repercussions to their actions around violence. They think that they get respawned, they get to go home at the end of the night.
Do you think gangster rap music plays into that as well?
I think that anything that influences our young people. I think we need more role models like you, for an example. Hey, it's great. Growing up, I like to watch baseball players, basketball players. I can't hit a home run and I got no jump shot. So I need to find people in the community that I can actually, so it's funny, on my desk in my office is an officer-friendly certificate from 1975.
Wow.
I was in first grade. That police officer made such an impression on me that I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So we need to find role models that aren't gangster rappers, that don't have a jump shot from half court, somebody we can emulate and go out and get a degree in business, go out and get a job in manufacturing, go out and get a job that pays good wages and supports a family. Not everybody can get a signing bonus for $2 million for pitching for the Cardinals.
True, but when some of the role models in the neighborhood are so-called drug dealers or hustlers or whatever the case may be, then that becomes the deterrent role model. But here's the question some people want to know, Chief Dotson. Do we have a drug war going on in St. Louis? Is that where some of the violence is coming from?
What we're seeing is that individuals that may sell drugs arm themselves. And so, do we have a drug war? No. Do we have entrepreneurs that set up shop? Yes. And if you compare us to New York, Chicago, LA, we don't have those organized groups, but we do have individuals that do sell drugs. Most of the violence that we see revolves around personal disputes, and a lot of them around young ladies. And so young men trying to impress the young ladies resort to violence. What may have been 10 years ago, 15 years ago, let's go behind the school, let's go in the alley and have a fist fight and settle this, now has deteriorated to let's see whose gun's bigger and who's able to pull out their gun and use it more quickly. That's what we're seeing. Drugs, any urban core is going to have challenges around drugs. The problems I'm seeing are people with guns that don't have the emotional maturity to be able to handle that weapon.
Let me ask you the next question, just because it's on the minds of our viewers and the population of St. Louis. Do we have a gang problem in St. Louis, as you see it?
What I see is that there are individuals, neighborhoods, that look for those identities, look for those role models. And again, they organize around that particular block. What I'm seeing is very seldom is it a feud between the organized gang and the organized gang. It's a feud between two individuals over a girl, and or two individuals over a car, or two individuals over something. It's not this group feuding with that group. So yes, young men, African American men predominantly, find identity in associating with a gang, but the gangs don't perpetuate the violence as much as we think, as you think they do. Yes, does it happen? But mostly it's individuals.
I see. Now, Chief Dotson, since you've got so much violence that is going on, and I really feel for you and your mission, it's got to be overwhelming. Are these violent acts of murder able to be solved on a regular basis? It almost seems like you're going from one to the other to the other to the other. I mean, how are the cold cases beginning to stack up?
Well, and it's a great question. And really, the key is to having individuals, witnesses, people in the neighborhood come forward, because we can solve a lot of cases. We can solve more cases when we have the neighborhood participation. So it's never an overwhelming caseload that we don't get to them. What happens is the leads dry up, or people that are willing to talk to us dry up. Even if we know who did it, we can't follow through prosecution through the circuit attorney's office and through the courts unless we have cooperation. So that's the key. It's not the overwhelming workload. Did I wish we had no murders? Absolutely. I wish those guys the homicide detectives could sit around and twiddle their thumbs all day. They do a fantastic job, but it's not like CSI. And so if you watch those shows, you know, in 45 minutes with 2 commercial breaks, I don't get DNA back, fingerprints, and, you know, have a trial. It's a very labor-intensive, hands-on, boots-on-the-ground process that the only way we can do it is if people talk to us and help us.
Do you have the manpower?
Right now, over the last 20-plus years, you may have heard me talk about this, crime in the country, the nation, has been trending down.
Okay.
Crime in the city of St. Louis since 2006 is down 40%. 2006 is the biggest year in the last 10 years. So crime is headed in the right direction. Crime doesn't always go down in a straight line. It doesn't always go up in a straight line. It goes in a squiggly line.
Sure.
As crime has gone down in the city, our police department has shrunk. So you've heard me and the mayor talk that we think 160 new officers are appropriate. So that's increasing the police department 12 to 15%. You'll hear more about that. So yes, I would like to see 160 new police officers over the next 2 years or so.
Awesome. Chief Dotson, thanks so much for being on the show. When we come back, we'll talk with James Clark about what he is doing to impact this plague of violence and how important this matter is to the city of St. Louis. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to The Issues. With me now is Vice President of Community Outreach and Better Family Life, James Clark. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Vern.
It's been a long time coming.
Yes.
Let's dive right in. James, homicides are up, particularly in the African American community in St. Louis. You have an extensive outreach program going on. Stop the violence, let's stop killing each other. I see your T-shirts on social media from coast to coast. I see signs in people's yards all across the country. Is it making a difference?
Well, Vern, I think that it is making a difference. We at Better Family Life understand that at the root of this crime and violence issue is a family problem, and then secondly, it's a neighborhood problem.
Let's go to the root. When you say family problem, can you be more specific? Is it, and here's my question, is it a result of the public assistance programs back in, let's say, the 60s, where the father couldn't be in the household, so the nuclear family of the African American community was basically disintegrated? Then we had children having children. Is this what we're seeing as a result of these things?
Well, you know, I think that you can go even further back than that. It has its origin in slavery, where the African family was totally destroyed. And of course, the social practices of welfare further removed that family unit. But here we are in 2015, and we have to take full responsibility for what is going on and what is going wrong in our families and in our neighborhoods. While we must look at it and we must fight and we must look for system reforms. So we have to be able to hold the system accountable. When you talk about the legal system, when you talk about the judicial system, the educational system, we have to hold systems accountable, but then we also have to be able to look into the mirror and say we have to begin to deal with our families and we have to begin to deal with our neighborhoods.
Tell me about your Neighborhood Alliance program.
The Neighborhood Alliance model, the funding and the founding principles are that we have neighborhoods that go grossly underserved. When you look at recently, the federal government looked at the landscape and said that there are communities where there's no vegetation. So they declared those communities food deserts. We believe that we've got to look at our urban core, and we have neighborhoods that are now resource deserts, where families are not afforded access to resources. And when I say resources, we are talking about health care, we're talking about drug treatment, we are talking about mentoring programs, we're talking about financial literacy, we are talking about education, employment. We have allowed the conditions to become so dense that individuals' lives are marginalized based on where they happen to be born. So through the Neighborhood Alliance model, we employ outreach workers that literally go door to door in our more challenged neighborhoods, and we do an assessment on the entire home. We want to know who lives in the home and what their individual needs are. Then we, after that assessment, we have 65 resource providers that we work with to refer family members to get the needs met of everyone in the home. Then, of course, we wrap around neighborhood-based case management.
Well, James, let me mention this. Chief Dotson, who was on the show earlier, said that economics plays a role in some of this African-American, black-on-black homicide rate. He alluded to gangster rap playing a possible role. And you mentioned entertainment. I'm going to assume that's probably the neighborhood you're talking about, the genre you're speaking of. We're reaching those who are in a certain age group, but the demographic that is perpetuating the violence is between 15 and 24. Are we making a difference in that populace that seems to be perpetuating the violence overwhelmingly?
Well, to answer you quickly, we're not making a difference because we're not engaging. Once we begin to effectively engage, and then there comes a certain amount of accountability where we have got to begin to hold entertainers accountable for the messages and the images in their music. See, Vern, when gangster rap first started, we gave them the title of reporters from the street. And we were able to look on television and for the first time see us, see how we were. I'm from the Jeff Vanderloo neighborhood, I felt a sense of empowerment because I saw individuals on the screen for the first time who walked like we walked, who talked like we talked. So we said that these are reporters from the street. Now, in 2015, they're actually selling a mentality that is very, very destructive, and they must be held accountable.
Well, it's a bigger issue than I think, especially when you're talking about the large media organizations
Yes.
that can perpetuate this. But how do we, again, reach those individuals who are perpetuating the violence? I don't believe, James, that they're buying the T-shirts that says "Stop the violence, stop killing each other." I don't know that they're putting the sign in their yard that says, if they have a yard, we must stop killing each other. How do we reach that demographic?
We have got to be willing to do what we haven't done, which is be active in our neighborhoods. We have tried to solve this problem from the courtroom. We've tried to solve this problem from the classroom. We've tried to solve this problem from the pulpit. We've tried to solve this problem everywhere but on the street corner, but on the front porch. So at Better Family Life, through the Neighborhood Alliance model, we believe that we've got to go boldly into our neighborhoods, and we've got to meet people where they are, and we've got to be able to meet their needs. See, we can't say, put down the pistol, if we can't help you find a job. See, we cannot talk our way out of this. We have, as a community, we've got to mature to the point where we take full responsibility for what's going on and what's going wrong. And we are at a very, very critical point right now. So when we say and when we promote we must stop killing each other, that's something that is undeniable. Now, are we at the point where we're all ready to mobilize around that? We are praying that we are to the point where we can look and say, we must stop this culture of crime and stop this culture of violence that we perpetuate on each other. We cannot let it continue because it will impact future generations and it only gets worse. See, this dysfunction becomes very, very transmittal. It's transferred from one generation to the next generation, and because the foundation isn't there, it gets progressively worse. So here in St. Louis, we're at a very, very critical time right now. We have got to be able to be outside the box, and we've got to be non-conventional in our approach. We cannot continue to do business as usual and expect things to get better. I applaud the chief. I think that he's very, very smart, and I believe that his heart is in the right place, and his tactics are good. Hotspot policing, community-oriented policing, and he just established a new office of community engagement. Very, very progressive. But we've got to use resource delivery in our more challenged neighborhoods. That's the cry right now. We need to get resources to individuals who have been systematically shut out.
But James, I'm going to say this. I don't believe that the Metropolitan Police Department of St. Louis can fix this problem on their own.
True.
My other question to you is, based on this model of this alliance program that you have, has it ever been tried before in any other market? Or is this a genuine idea that you're implementing for the first time?
There have been similar models.
And how did those work out? What kind of results were proven?
They were met with varying degrees of success. But we believe that the Neighborhood Alliance model is tailored for St. Louis. See, St. Louis is not Chicago, where you have blocks and blocks that are destabilized. St. Louis is not Los Angeles, where you have you can have an entire community the size of North St. Louis where crime and violence has a firm grip and gangs have a generational grip. St. Louis is not New York. Here in St. Louis, we have small pockets throughout the St. Louis metropolitan area. You can go 2 and 3 blocks in either direction and find stable homes with a stable environment. You go 2 or 3 blocks past that, and it's a destabilized environment. So we think that we've got to begin to zero in on those areas, door to door, family assessment, resource delivery, and neighborhood-based case management.
Okay, James, I have to ask you a couple questions. People want to know, are you generating revenue from T-shirt sales or sign sales? If so, how is that money being allocated towards the movement?
Well, we are accepting donations.
Okay.
Because we have to be able to sustain that whole visibility campaign.
Okay.
So the donation that is recommended, $10 for a T-shirt, $10 for a yard sign. The first 500 T-shirts gave away. The first 500 yard signs we put along major thoroughfares just to get the visibility. Now we are very, very happy to see that St. Louis and other metropolitan areas throughout the country are galvanizing around that message of we must stop killing each other. So the revenue that is generated goes right back to purchase more signs, goes right back to purchase more T-shirts, because we want to be able to continue this. Everyone that drives past that yard sign reads it. We must stop killing each other. And that's something that is undeniable. I talk to gangbangers on the street corner.
Well, let me ask you that. Since you mentioned gangbangers, I asked Chief Dotson this same question. Do you think this is a gang-related problem? Do you think we have a drug war going on?
Well, I think right now it's a very, very complex thing. I don't think that we have a drug war. I don't think that right now, today, it's not necessarily gangs. Right now, you have teenagers that run in clubs. So they have clubs. Most of them have a 3-letter name to them, GDB or something along those lines. Then you have neighborhoods. So we have a ever changing, morphing issue in the urban core, and we've got to be able to change and morph with it. Right now, we're using conventional methods to solve a very unconventional-ish problem.
Okay, James Clark, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Best of luck to you in your outreach program, and
Thank
continue
you.
to do a great job with Better Family Life and the Community Outreach Program. We hope we have provided a lively discussion about a very important issue facing the St. Louis community. We'd also like for you to be part of our efforts, so please join us for our next show and continue to support us here at STL TV. Continue leaving your comments on our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter, and check out our YouTube channel. I'm Vern Fuller, and for all of us here on The Issues, have a great day.
Good show. Yeah.